Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for attending this morning's workshop. I hope everyone was able to clear out from all the snow from yesterday. I know we've all got sick of the snow that's come down this winter, but it's good for the farmers and hopefully it will lead to a good spring. I want to welcome everybody to the final Living Lab Club virtual workshop titled the Manitoba LLEP or Living Lab Eastern Prairies Experience. My name is Dan Cox, and I'm the project manager for the Manitoba Association of Watersheds. I would like to acknowledge that I am hosting this virtual workshop from my office in Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is located within Treaty 1 territory for the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dene, and Dakota, and is the birthplace of the Métis Nation and the heart of the Métis Nation homeland. Over the past 2 weeks, MA has hosted 3 workshops that covered the topics of implementing regenerative practices in cropping systems and pasture systems and cover cropping in southern Manitoba. This morning, we will be taking a deep dive into the Living Lab Eastern Prairies project with interviews from Living Lab producers, Watershed District staff, and AAFC researchers. If you would like more information on the Living Lab Eastern Prairies project after today's workshop, please visit the Manitoba Association of Watersheds website and the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada Living Lab Laboratories Initiative website. Before I begin today's workshop, I would like to cover 2 housekeeping items. One, the Living Lab Club virtual workshops are being recorded and will be posted on the Living Lab Eastern Prairies websites and social media at a future date. We will be emailing all of the attendees with follow-up information about how to access all of the workshops that have gone on over the past 2 weeks. And finally, the Q&A function of this webinar is active. That is how we will interact with you, the audience, through questions. So please provide any questions you have using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and they will be answered in the Q&A box or during the Q&A sessions of today's presentations. So what are we going to cover today, and in what format? My objective today is giving attendees an understanding of what the Living Lab Eastern Prairies project is through a series of interviews with Living Lab Eastern Prairies participants. And after a brief introduction to what a Living Lab is, I will be interviewing Dorthea Gregoire from the Seine Roseau Watershed District. Following Dorthea, I will be interviewing a Living Lab producer, Wayne Chubaty, also from the Seine Roseau Watershed District, specifically the Main Drain Watershed. And finally, I will interview 3 Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada researchers who have been undertaking research projects for the past 3 years through the Living Lab Eastern Prairies project. To close out the workshop, we will briefly discuss what is next for the Living Lab initiative. So what is a living laboratory? It's not a new concept. It's a concept that's been around outside of the agricultural industry for years. But what is it? A living laboratory is an integrated approach to agricultural innovation that brings farmers, scientists, and other partners together to go develop, test, and monitor management practices and new technologies in a real-life context. The result will be more practical technologies and sustainable farming practices adopted more quickly by Canadian farmers. And as you can see from the graphic on the right, that is the process to which a living laboratory, specifically with Living Labs Eastern Prairies, works. A planning and targeting and redefining a cycle of priorities and outcomes, co-design or co-development, identifying the needs and outcomes and anticipating possible impediments in the process. Then comes the exploration and the experimentation, acquiring new data, conducting new experiments, and developing new knowledge. Followed by evaluation, evaluating new practices or technologies and adjusting based on producer input with the farmer at all times. Adoption is the final step, taking stock of the experiments and the cycle of innovation, and then repeating that cycle back to planning and targeting and co-development to ensure the process is good. So what are the 3 core principles of a living laboratory? 1, participants in a living lab can co-develop practices or technologies that are carefully designed, tested, and improved, and they ensure they meet the needs of the users. You'll hear from Mr. Chubaty today and from Dorthea Gregoire of the Watershed District around how carefully and how the process of co-development with the producers was over the past 3 years, and how the feedback was on an annual basis and routine basis with them. So what are those 3 principles and integrating those 3 principles mean? It means they're more likely to be adopted and that they will be adopted more quickly. So what is the innovation cycle? I kind of touched on this in the first slide, but the innovation cycle of a living lab: co-development, identifying the needs and the outcomes, generate and share ideas; test, conduct the experiment, acquire new data, explore and develop new knowledge; and then evaluate, take stock of the results, including all types of data and user experiences. And that is the cycle of the living lab. And you go back to, after evaluating, you go back to co-development and reevaluate the outcomes and generate and share ideas, and go back to testing in the next field season. And that goes on and on through the cycle of your projects. This is Living Labs is a 4-year project. So we've had the opportunity to have a couple of co-development sessions with producers like Wayne, and where you talk about what's going on, and you adjust as the project goes through, and you talk about results. And eventually the long-term goal of Living Labs Eastern Prairies and projects like it is to have adoption of the work that's of the BMPs that are being worked on and researched through the process. So across Canada, there are 4 living labs currently working under the Living Laboratories Initiative. There's one in Ontario, there's one in Quebec, and there's one in Atlantic Canada in Prince Edward Island. And of course, the Living Labs Eastern Prairies here in Manitoba. All 4 of the Living Labs work under the same broad themes that were defined in the initial stakeholder meetings with regional groups. And those 4 themes are water, quantity and quality; soil health, both physical, chemical, and biological properties; biodiversity and wildlife habitat; and climate, greenhouse gas emission reductions and climate change adaptation. Today, with our AFC researchers and with Wayne Chubaty, you're going to hear how we cover on the water side, the soil health side, and the biodiversity side of our project. So finally, what is the Living Lab Eastern Prairies project? And where does the project take place in Manitoba? The Living Lab Eastern Prairies project is a 4-year project with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada that provides funding for farmers, researchers, and various partners, such as watershed districts, to work hand in hand on farms, developing novel tools and techniques that are tailored to local environments and needs. The 4 watersheds within Manitoba that were identified at the beginning of the process and selected based on the diversity of size, geographical location, climate, and land use are the Swan Lake Watershed, that is in the Pembina Valley Watershed District; the North Shannon Watershed, which is in the Redboyne Watershed District; the Upper Oak Watershed, which is in the Assiniboine West Watershed District; and the one we are focused on most today, the Main Drain Watershed, which is in the Seine Roseau Watershed District. So I think that's a good outline of what the Living Labs Eastern Prairies is, and I wanted to get into our first interview, and we can talk to the Watershed District. So I wanted to welcome Dorthea Gregoire from the Seine Roseau Watershed District. Good morning, Dorthea.
Morning, Dan. Thank you for having me. Can you hear and see me okay?
We can, yes. Thank you very much.
Perfect.
So just to start off, I think a good place to start would be to talk about the Seine Roseau Watershed District as a whole, and what's if you can give us a brief description of the Seine Roseau Watershed District and your role within the Watershed District, that would be great.
So we're one of 14 watershed districts across Manitoba, and our area is southeastern Manitoba. So we're basically responsible for the area that starts at the Red River, goes almost all the way up north to almost the border with Winnipeg, and then comes down at a diagonal across the Trans-Canada to the Ontario border. And in that area, what we try to do is to promote land management practices and stewardship that really focus on creating both a healthy economy and a healthy land and water resource base. Specifically, how we try to do this is through incentive-based programming. So we don't necessarily pay farmers to do things, but what we try to do is to help alleviate some of the risk that goes along with trying new management practices. So we fund all kinds of programs such as, water retention, livestock management, and now more recently initiatives such as ALICE, or initiatives through the provincial programs such as GROW, which help farmers transition to some of these soil health programs. And one of the big focuses that we've always had is having innovation come through from the farmers. So that's where Living Labs was a really good fit for us.
Perfect. Thanks, Dorthea. That's I think you described the watershed districts very well there, and what they do in Manitoba with the producers that live within their watershed districts. That's great. I think the watershed districts are a backbone of this province when it comes to the agriculture industry and providing programming and funding to farmers. Before the Living Lab Eastern Prairies project came around, what were some of the issues or concerns that farmers within the watershed districts were having?
So of course I can't speak to all the issues and concerns farmers have, because they have to deal with a huge number of things, but the ones that we were, able to address a bit were those related to drought and flooding. It seems like no matter what, there's always too much or not enough. And with that, a lot of our producers, whether they're crop producers or livestock producers, they need water security. So there's always a lot of concerns around those kind of issues. Perfect.
Mm-hmm. So when you first heard of the Living Lab Eastern Prairies project, what intrigued you? What intrigued the district, or what intrigued you personally about the program, the Living Lab Eastern Prairies project?
One of the best things when we heard about this really was that it gave us an opportunity to give a little bit something extra to our main drain watersheds. So this area, we had a strong producer base to start, which has grown significantly since we partnered with Living Labs. But our programming could only do so much as it was. But when we partnered with Living Labs, it gave us a lot of opportunity to take an extra step, to try out some pilots, to hear from the producers what they thought was really needed and could really improve their on-farm operations, and see how that might mix back with what we're doing. And on top of that, I mean, instead of us as a watershed district trying to build this from the ground, we had this phenomenal opportunity to get the support of researchers with various specialties that could give us, a world of information. And we could take that information, work it in with what the farmer knows about his or her land, and then see what we could offer as a watershed district to those producers. So it's kind of like, instead of taking small steps, we're able to take a big leap forward into our programming.
That's great to hear. And that's that the watershed district through programs like Living Lab Eastern Prairies are able to advance and really provide something different or new, and or building on what farmers are already doing. So that's great to hear. What have been some of the most beneficial projects that you've undertaken at the watershed district through the Living Lab Eastern Prairies project?
So one of the biggest things I found was not necessarily a specific project, but our ability to reach out to more people in the area. So we had always had a strong base out there since we came down into this area, but through Living Labs, we were able to reach a lot more people. If you look at the main drain map that you'd shown before, you can see there's a strong divide. There's more pasture-based land use on one side and more cropland-based land use on the other side. And although we had reasonably strong, thank you, Dan. So all the nice, pretty colors, that's where you have a lot more cattle farmers there. And then on the other side of the ridge, soil type changes and you're dealing with more Red River clays, and you can have a lot more crop producers out there. And of course, there's producers such as Wayne who, straddle both sides and work a bit of both. But really, we didn't often have a lot to offer those crop specific guys, especially the producers that didn't have any livestock. And that's just by the nature of our pre-existing programming. So we were able to reach out to them and start building those relationships, which was phenomenal. And some of them were able to, some of the relationships were fostered by the researchers, such as the groups dealing with biodiversity studies who were able to partner with these producers as well. So that was really huge to us. And even beyond the Living Labs specific program, we saw a huge uptake in our general programming in and around this area, because people really started to get to know us and to know what we could do and to be able to ask us, I've got this idea, I don't know if it quite fits, but what do you think? So not only were we able to do living labs-based projects, but our own standard projects also had an uptake, a greater uptake than in other areas. And of course, another huge thing here, I have to put a big shout out to the researchers, because we've been very fortunate in having been able to build relationships with phenomenal researchers who are able to provide, on the ground support, answer questions, give options to producers regarding everything, from dealing with pollinators, dealing with pest weed species, to water management, grazing management, and just kind of start building those links and getting the information flowing. So that has been absolutely huge. And coming from that, I think, and from some of our previous Living Labs Club meetings, has been this huge surge in interest in soil health. And like you mentioned before, one of our targets through Living Labs is soil health. But coming into this, we didn't realize how much of an uptake we'd have from the producer side in interest with cover crops, with land use management, with building soil organic matter. And that's coming really from the ground up, with the producers showing huge interest, themselves bringing in meetings. The last couple of years have been a bit difficult. Obviously, we're on Zoom for a reason and not sitting somewhere a little bit closer to home in a hall where we could talk in person. So it's been hard to get a lot of big scale educational events going, but it's still happening despite all the COVID challenges, which is really telling of how invested our producers are in, getting information on some of these ideas and trying them out on their own farms. So that's been really huge for us. And that's pushed our watershed district in a brand new direction. And I think that's been really going to be good for both our watershed district and for the local agricultural landscape.
Thanks, Dorthea. That's great to hear that a project like Living Lab Eastern Prairies can be a catalyst for bringing farmers to the table and talking about things that they've probably been talking about for years, but have never really had that forum and or the programming to either test it or take it to the next level on their farm. And so with the help of researchers and district staff. So and that's so that not only are you reaching out to new producers, but you're going to be reaching out to a bunch of new producers, but you're getting them to try things that they've never tried before, or at least talk to their neighbors about what they're trying, and providing a forum for neighbors to discuss, other than the coffee shop, to all discuss about a specific topic. I know we had soil health workshops in person a couple of years ago at the start of the Living Lab Eastern Prairies that were very well attended. We had well over 300 people attending the 4 workshops that we ran. So that probably peaked the start of the soil health conversation. And yes, COVID-19 has definitely put us on this harder path to having these communications and co-development sessions. But the producers, when we did our individual sessions last year online and Zoom, were so adaptable to even meeting online, which is probably not always in the comfort zone of everybody. And so it was really great to see everybody take the step about meeting online to ensure that things were moving forward and projects were moving forward. So that was great to see there, even with all the droughts and the conditions they had last year, and the hardships, they still gave us the time to talk about their projects and their farms. So that was great. Leading into that, the co-development and the collaboration between researchers and district staff and partners and producers is a cornerstone of Living Lab Eastern Prairies. It's how information that is gathered will get out outside of the Living Labs project to other farmers and to other producers. In your experience over the past 3 years with AAFC researchers and Living Labs producers like Wayne, and you kind of touched on this already, how's your experience been when it comes to co-development and collaboration with researchers and producers?
I have to be honest, we've had an excellent experience, and it's something that really we wish we could expand throughout our entire district. Obviously, we're confined to the main drain primarily for the sake of the Living Labs project, but we've had like I mentioned, amazing work being done between the producers and the researchers. Our main job, we thought, coming into this was just to facilitate some of these relationships, to pair researchers with producers we thought might be open or interested in their lines of work. And really, some of these relationships have taken off to the point where we can step back and see the fruits of our labor without, as a watershed district, having to put in a lot of on the ground labor, because that relationship between producer and researcher has just flourished. And I know I've seen a lot of producers come back now, being comfortable saying, hey, can we reach out to this researcher because I have a question on this topic? And building that kind of relationship, I think, is fundamental. I mean, to that extent, even ourselves, we've been able to reach out to various researchers to help us with specific seeding plans. What should we be planting in a certain area for a producer who's dealing with poor growing conditions, maybe salinity, but is open to adding pollinator plantings, diversity to his fields. What can we do? Can we use cattle to augment this one piece of pasture that's really been suffering over the decades because nobody's known how to manage it properly? What can we do to fix that so that what's currently a water issue can become, a positive for the producer? And that's where our researcher relationships has been fundamental to kind of getting some solid advice from them and getting the on the ground support as well to see some of these results. So some of the researchers have projects on the go that are measuring, what's out there. A lot of producers have a very hard time quantifying, the benefits of doing a project because it's hard to, they don't do the research obviously on their own. They aren't putting up experiments before taking measurements. So having that ability to have someone go out and say, well, this is your baseline, and now that you've done this project, this is the difference that you made. I think that's huge, especially when we can add a dollar value to it, or a herd health value to it, or an other gains to it.
Thanks. That's great to hear that the collaboration and the co-development has gone well, even in the face of COVID-19 and everything we've dealt with. So that's great. Last question I've got, and please, anybody in the audience, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A box. If you have any questions for Dorthea during the entire session this morning, feel free to put a question in there and she can answer it. But I think I know the answer to this because it's been pretty obvious in your answers. But based on your experience over the past 2 years, would you recommend to other farmers and watershed districts to join programs like Living Labs if they come up in the future iterations of Living Labs initiative in Manitoba?
Yeah, you're right. Like, it's an obvious yes from us. If we had the opportunity to enter another watershed into a Living Labs iteration, or to enter our whole district into a Living Labs iteration, I think we definitely go for it. And the benefits that we see are beyond, I think, what we ever expected from it. It grew a lot more. Just the network that we've created. I spoke a bit to the fact that our producers are, interested in cover cropping, and through Living Labs, we were able to make connections at the University of Manitoba and work collaboratively with them to create a cover crop resource document that's going to be coming out, in the next couple of weeks, available to the public, so that any producer who's interested in starting out with cover crops but really doesn't know too much about them can get free information and a place to start. It's also, from our point of view, like I said, allowed us to deepen our connections with producers and expand on what we can offer. So very, very good experience. And I'd say to any watershed district or other organization that has a chance to bring this out onto the landscape to their communities, to definitely give it a shot. It's well worth it.
Well, thank you, Dorthea. That was a great conversation. I really appreciate your time this morning and answering the questions and promoting the Living Lab Eastern Prairies project and the work that Seine Roseau Watershed District is doing. So thank you very much. Again, if anybody has any questions for Dorthea, please put them in the Q&A and we'll answer them as we go along here. But thank you again, Dorthea, for coming on today.
Thank you. And thank you, Dan, for putting this all together for us. It's been great.
No problem. So next up on our interview list, we're going to talk to a producer that is involved in the Living Lab Eastern Prairies project in the main drain watershed that is part of the Seine Roseau watershed district. Mr. Wayne Chubaty. Good morning, Wayne. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I see you're on mute. I'm going to see if we can get you off mute. There we go.
Hi, Dan. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. And again, really appreciate your time. I know, farming, even during the winter, there's always stuff going on. So we really appreciate your time and to come on this morning and talk about your experiences. I guess to start, I asked Dorthea to kind of give a brief description of her background and her operation. So if you could give a brief description of yourself and your farming operation for the attendees, that would be great.
Yeah, I operate a mixed farm consisting of 600 acres of small grain, 350 acres of hay and forage alfalfa production, and I maintain a herd of 150 Black Angus cattle. Crops are produced are spring wheat, canola, oats, alfalfa, hay, silage corn. The cattle operation is a cow-calf operation with cows calving in April and May. The calves are weaned in the fall, backgrounded until spring. I produce all my own cow feed on the farm. The farm consists of some heavy clay soil and lighter sandy soil. Most quarter sections have a creek running through them that we have to deal with.
Thanks, Wayne. And so, just hearing that you grow all your own feed, I'm sure last year with the drought conditions, I'm sure that was a challenge, or were you able to make it through no problem?
It was an extreme challenge, using a, three-pronged approach with hay, alfalfa, corn, and some green feed. We managed, and thankfully I had substantial carryover from 2019 or 2020, sorry, that was we had an excellent crop then, and I hung on to some for a cushion.
Well, foresight, it worked out. It's a good thing. So I asked Dorthea the same kind of question about before Living Lab Eastern Prairies came along, what were some of the issues and concerns they had in their district? So same question to you in terms of before work with the researchers in district through Living Lab Eastern Prairies came along. What were some of the issues and concerns that you were having on your farm?
Some of the issues and concerns were, stemmed around our production issues, like, such as, forage production, pasture production, herd health was an issue. And of course that enters into its soil health and soil quality, water retention, drainage. I do have some issues with high salt in certain portions of my soil. So those issues all, they're in the back of your mind when you're doing your work every day. You're kind of looking at this and you're kind of wondering, how can I make it better?
Yeah, those sound like obviously very common issues for farmers all over Manitoba, and so that's good to hear that. Hopefully there's some help here with Living Labs Eastern Prairies project on some of those issues. When you first heard of the Living Lab Eastern Prairies project, what intrigued you about the program?
The part of it was being able to discuss, some of the issues I'm, seeing and having, and getting an extra set of eyes and input on, solving some of these problems and trying to make the farm work better in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, innovation is obviously, and I'm obviously not a farmer from Winnipeg, Manitoba, but I think innovation is key, and it sounds like improving the farm has been something that you're very much interested in solving these issues to improve the productivity on your farm.
Yeah, it's an ongoing, it's a work in progress.
So what has been, you've signed up with Living Lab Eastern Prairies, you've been a part of the program for the past 3 years. What has been the most beneficial, or a couple of the most beneficial projects that have been undertaken on your farm through the Living Lab Eastern Prairies project?
Probably the most beneficial would be the retention projects that we implemented. They provide better water for the cow herd, which improves herd health. These projects, they provide not only, the better water for the cattle, but also some peace of mind knowing I have extra water capacity in times of drought, and it's better managed. And it also provides an alternative water source for the herd in the winter months as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, obviously last year with the drought, it probably wasn't too much water flowing through the measurements of those with the researchers and the water retention project, but which is a thing to study as well, right? How you got to study your conditions in drought as well, and we'll hear from Steve Sager on that in a bit. But hopefully, with this amount of snow and this amount of snowpack out there, we'll really see that water retention project maximized to its full benefit when it comes to knock on wood, when it comes to this spring and the runoff and the upcoming season. I would assume that's something you're hoping for, is to see that project kind of really hit its max this year.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to testing everything out.
Good. So it's good. We'll get both extremes, right? You got the extreme last year of drought, and hopefully, hopefully it's an extreme of water, but hopefully it's a level of water that is manageable, and that the water retention project is handling really well.
Yeah.
So on the co-development side, like I mentioned with Dorthea's questions, co-development and collaboration are a cornerstone of the Living Labs initiative. How has your experience been with the AFC researchers and the Watershed District staff and partners during the first 3 years of the project when it comes to collaboration and co-development?
My experience has been excellent. With staff and researchers, they're very approachable, easy to work with, and very accommodating and helpful. It helps make each project more successful.
Perfect. Yeah, no, I know actually tomorrow we have a session set up tomorrow afternoon with all the researchers to sit down in a Zoom environment and have a one-on-one about all the projects and get into the research and what's coming up next year. So that's the perfect time of year. This is typically when we try to do that. So I really appreciate your time tomorrow as well when we have that co-development session. So final question I have is the same one I asked Dorthea. Based on your last experience over the past 3 years in the program, would you recommend it to other farmers and other producers to join programs like Living Labs?
Yeah, it's kind of, for me, it's a no-brainer. I would encourage other farmers to join, especially if they're interested in making their operation more resilient to future weather challenges. And, Living Labs has been a good fit for my operation. As inputs and land increase in value, it's kind of our job as farmers to maximize the potential of these assets while maintaining in the soil. If we can, pass it on in better condition than we found it, that's a win for everyone, right?
It is. Well, thank you very much, Wayne. I really appreciate your time this morning. It's been a great conversation to hear. Everyone loves hearing from, and what we've heard from the first few workshops that we've done. Everyone really enjoys hearing from producers and hearing about their experiences. It really hammers home how a project is or isn't working. So we really appreciate your time this morning. And if anybody has any questions for Wayne, please put them in the Q&A, and we will answer them as we go along. But Wayne, please stay on the line just in case we have questions. But and you can hear from the researchers going forward. But thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you. So now we will get into the Know Your Researcher section of our program. And the first researcher that I wanted to bring on this morning is from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, is May Elsinger. Good morning, May. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Dan. Morning, everybody.
So, as I mentioned, you're a researcher from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Did you want, I think, as I got Dorthea and as I got Wayne to start off their interviews, could you start this one off with a brief description of yourself and your background and your education? That'd be a great start.
Yeah, May Elsinger. I work for Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada at Brandon, Manitoba, with the Science and Technology branch. So that's the research arm. And I guess education-wise, it's complicated. It's not just going to school. It's what I learned along the way. School gives me a good foundation, but to make that work in the real world, it's a whole other education unto itself. So I took land reclamation studies at the University of Alberta. And then while I was doing that, I dabbled in rangeland management. So that's where I learned about revegetation, inventorying pastures, doing grazing planning systems, and learning how to identify grassland plants. So then I worked for 5 years with Agriculture Canada, and then took a Master of Science, which was a field-based master's. And that sort of gave me an education in experimental design and more of the researchy type things for plant communities. And that's coming in handy for my research work.
Perfect. Way more education than I would ever go for. So I can appreciate that. And I appreciate the fact that education for researchers like yourself doesn't stop with just going to school, right? It's an ongoing thing. So I can definitely appreciate that and respect that for sure. What attracted you to the agricultural industry, whether it was getting into education or continuing on? What attracted you to the industry, and more specifically to research aspect of agriculture?
Well, I always grew up appreciating agriculture. We had a small farm in northern Alberta. So that's what encouraged me to go into agricultural studies or ag-related, field-related studies. So with my rangeland management that I got in my first round of education, I got a job with PFRA in Regina, and that was doing work with community pastures. So range assessments, pasture planning. It was my dream job. We dabbled a little bit on mini experiments on the pastures, but by no means was it like my full-time job. I wasn't really interested in getting into full-time research, but sort of making the best of it. I prefer to be out on the land with producers, looking at their problems and trying to find ways to solve challenges. So Living Labs has been very refreshing that way, in that I am able to use research techniques, but also to do it directly with producers on their farms.
Yeah, that is an interesting dynamic of the Living Lab Eastern Prairies project, is that ability for researchers to not just be in the lab for lack of a better term, right? To be able to be out in the field, to be doing their work, to be communicating with the producers. So I think that is definitely a big positive of this program. So your current role with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and the Living Lab Eastern project, if you could talk about what your current role is with the project and with AFC.
Yeah, I serve multiple roles in the Living Labs project. And I guess if I could sum it up, it's primarily based on my understanding of perennial vegetation. So that's vegetation or plants that live for multiple years, and their role in the ag landscape. I also understand grazing systems and how they impact grass. And so my job is with Living Labs is to support other researchers in their work, when they're dealing with perennial vegetation or grazing systems. For example, take Aaron Glenn, who wants to see if pastures can sequester enough carbon to offset greenhouse gas emissions by grazing. So he should know that not all grazing systems are equal, and that the forage resources on different pastures are different. So I help him with that understanding. Another example would be like if you have a water retention project constructed on your land, it should be revegetated. And so my understanding of perennial vegetation helps in establishing that vegetation and what plants are appropriate, what are the goals of the revegetation, which plants will match those goals. And then, of course, the techniques that are among the best for getting that vegetation established.
Perfect. So now that we've got a good knowledge of who you are and what you do with AAFC, let's talk about the work that you're doing, some of the projects that you're doing, not only with in the main drain with the producers like Wayne Chubaty, but in general around all across the 4 watershed districts. If you've can expand on some of the work that you're doing, that'd be great.
I think the main drain gives a good cross section of the types of work I'm doing, so I might just focus there.
Sure.
We have 2 producers, for example, who indicated a desire to understand the quality and productivity of the grass on their pastures. These same producers also have problems with leafy spurge. So, with those 2 producers, I'm studying pasture productivity, what plants are on their pastures, and also a sort of new technique for using leafy spurge flea beetles to moderate the cover of leafy spurge. So that's 2 of the producers. We had another producer in main drain that wants to try some water retention projects on this pasture, on his pasture. And so it's a series of different retentions. So that kind of gives us an opportunity to try different planting approaches. So we want to try, a passive planting approach where we just let it revegetate on its own. We want to try a pollinator enhanced mixture because we're interested in boosting pollinator value on such works. And we want to use maybe a more traditional pasture or hay mix to cover a third retention area. So that's one third producer, and then a 4th producer has expressed frustration with trying to get a pasture mix established on an area that's salt affected. So because we have interest in improving plant resources for pollinators, and he has an interest in trying to get the saline area revegetated, we've come up with a pasture planting mix that will hopefully establish well on saline areas and provide feed for the bees. So my work with that will be observing the development of that mixture after it's planted. Did you want me to share results, Dan?
Yeah, if you can share your screen, yeah, that'd be great. Should be able to, no problem.
Okay.
Let's take over mine.
Hit the share screen button. Okay, I need to stop others sharing, share screen. And I will show you my slides. How does that look, Dan?
That looks good.
First, I wanted to, point out the obvious about the weather that we had last year. So with regards to forage productivity, that's highly affected by precipitation. So in fall of 2020 and through winter, we got very, very small amounts compared to normal. So the first row is actual and the second row is normal. And as you can see, it's about a quarter to a third of normal precipitation throughout the winter. So that's your precipitation that's being banked for the following year. And then last spring, while cool season plants are trying to develop, you guys had about I think it looks like a third of normal precipitation. And that's a critical period because these plants are growing quickly and need that moisture. Summer wasn't too bad, but it was still, it's quite well below normal. And then if we look at the days of significant storms, like water equivalent greater than 5 millimeters, so with a 0.2 of an inch, decent sized storm. In the past winter, you guys only had like 1 in 5 normal days, so quite dramatically reduced. You had less than half of your normal large storms in spring and around half throughout the summer. So the rain was just not coming, and it showed in the vegetation. I'm looking at the current winter's storage of precipitation. We're above normal, so we're at 195 millimeters of precipitation since early October, which is above normal. We have 41 days of storms or just a whiff of snow. And then we have 5 days so far with major storms, which is about halfway there compared to a normal year. So looking good. I'm hoping for a slow melt to slowly deal with that large accumulation of snow that you guys have. So in our productivity measurements, we put up these grazing cages because we want to measure the potential productivity. We can't do that if cows are eating it. So we set up these grazing cages every spring before grazing. And then we'll come along in the middle of summer in July and harvest peak productivity. So that's, the maximum production of the grass. It comes, reaches about early July. And then we came again in the fall to assess regrowth. And these are just the peak productivity measures. So I've divided them out. So this is all of Living Labs and 1 or 2 other locations in Manitoba. So I've divided it out by vegetation type along the top, the short grass versus grass legume mixtures, which tend to be more productive. And then the wet meadow grasses, like in the moisture areas. And then on the left-hand side, I separated out the different rotational or non-rotational systems. And within that, there's different soil types. So the producers in the main drain fall in this category. So the meadows on each of the producer sites didn't produce a whole lot more than the uplands on or the short grass uplands. And that's, a good sign that the moisture was not stored. So this being an utterly disgusting drought year, I hope to see these as the lowest forage productivity measurements in my lifetime, and that it can only go up from here. And I thought I might reflect on the spurge work. I don't have any results for it yet, but just to demonstrate what activities we're doing. So with the 2 producers that I talked about that had concerns, we did some leafy spurge flea beetle releases, and we did some baseline measurements of the stem density of the spurge and other factors of the spurge populations. So what we hope to see over time with these leafy spurge flea beetles is that they reduce the density of the spurge. Unfortunately, they can never eradicate it. Eradication is, I think, for well-established populations of spurge, I think herbicides and such are beyond reach. You might get the population down, but it just springs back from the seed bank within 5 years. So leafy spurge beetles have been around for decades in Manitoba, but the traditional approach has just been make one release on a patch and then leave it and hope for the best, which is not the best way of using this technique. So the technique I'm trying is a more inundative approach. So putting massive amounts of beetles, like more than one release on a patch, and then visiting that release every year. And if the beetles are doing well, then I'm sweeping them up and moving them up, around within that patch to hopefully make a quicker attack on the spurge. So that's what I'm hoping to do with the spurge research. So not much results to share, but those are my activities.
Perfect. Thanks, mate. That's it's great to see even in the drought years how the researchers are still out there doing work and working with what's in front of them, right? And working with the conditions that are there, because getting the extremes on both sides is obviously very important. It is good to see from your data that from the particularly the precipitation data that hopefully there's a snowpack melt and there's a precipitation amount over the winter here that is going to lead to a productive season coming up in 2022 and give you guys, researchers and farmers, the other side of the spectrum when it comes to drought and rainfall. So in terms of I asked this question obviously of Wayne and of Dorthea around co-development and your experiences with co-development. but how has your experiences been with co-development and knowledge transfer within the Living Lab Eastern Prairies project?
So for me, I guess I came in at a later stage, so I wasn't in on some of the earlier initial focus groups that got Living Labs started. And then after that, like COVID came along and we still couldn't have gatherings. So it was kind of awkward that way. But I think what was of most value to me, and I hope was of great value to the producers, was these one-on-one meetings that we have, where you just sit down with an individual producer and we get to know their farm. We get to know their challenges, get to know the context, of the different systems that they're using. And then, then we could start, posing solutions to those problems or imagining different ways to research, or gather data of what's going on the farms, to understand the systems, and if we implement any new practices, then we certainly want to study those and gather data on those. So yeah, that's my favorite, is the one-on-one meetings.
All right. What do you what's upcoming for you in this final year of obviously more of the same, the grazing cages, the leafy spurge work? Is there some other things that are going on for you in this upcoming field season?
Yeah, for this year, I would like to continue doing the forage productivity work, obviously, to get measurements corresponding to different, hopefully better precipitation. I want to definitely follow up on the leafy spurge work. Ideally, that's a 5 to 6 year study. So I hope in some way to continue with that. And this year, what I would add to my work plan is a bunch of revegetation surveys. So on different, especially retention waterworks, some pastures and some hay fields, just to see what the different types of planting methods yield. One thing I'm really interested in on retention areas is natural recovery or passive revegetation. Now, I understand on smaller projects in the main drain, they just kind of let it go. So I want to compare that with, active revegetation and see, is our active methods, where you have to spend some money, you have to source some seed, you have to make a bunch of decisions. If all that effort is really necessary, especially in the way of installing pollinator habitat, like basically wildflowers. Will wildflowers do the same or better or worse if we just let it go versus if we actually try to plant something there? So those are my 3 major activities that I want to do with Living Labs: is the productivity, spurge work, and the vegetation surveys.
So we did get our first question in the Q&A, and it is around your work, May, and you might have just answered it with your previous answer, but someone would like to know, when do you expect to have data on the effectiveness of the beetle approach when it comes to the leafy spurge?
Yeah, the second year, which is this year coming in 2022, is probably not enough time. Unfortunately, that's the close of Living Labs. I would need 5 to 6 years. I've seen it happen on some places in 3 to 4 years to determine if the community is progressing in a positive manner. So I'm hoping that there will be ways that I can revisit these sites to continue the data collections.
This is just for me personally on a question, but how big of an area were you covering in researching with the beetles and leafy spurge?
Yeah, so again, it's 2 separate pastures, and it's kind of two different patterns. One of the pastures has a ridge, maybe 100, 150 yards long, that's covered with spurge. And then there's maybe a half-acre corner of that same pasture. So on that, we kind of divided in a half or a third. And so on 2/3, we're using the beetles to treat. And then on 1/3 of it, we would be using conventional techniques. In this case, it's kind of a spray once in a while if I have time, sort of conventional technique. On the other pasture, it's 4 major patches of spurge, the largest one being probably an acre, maybe 2 acres. And so that one's getting the spurge treatment, and another patch is getting the spurge beetle treatment. And then the other 2 are getting a conventional treatment, which is maybe we'll spray, but it's probably not likely. But on top of that, that particular pasture already has a very thin population of leafy spurge flea beetles, released in the 2000s, I think.
Oh.
The population is just too thin to be making a difference. So my project kind of boosts population, see if it can get things going faster.
So obviously there's probably the obvious benefit of the beetles would be that you're not using a chemical or a conventional treatment. Are there other benefits to using the beetles versus the conventional that you've come across yet, or is it still in the works?
The beetles, it's relatively cheap to apply. With my technique, there's a bit of more labor involved because you have to revisit every year and move things around. What we find with the chemicals is that most of the chemicals that are effective on spurge also take out your legumes and your wildflowers. So that's one key reason why we would like to avoid chemical use. However, at a single point in time, it looks great when you apply chemical for a couple of years, but the problem doesn't go away. So in some ways, it's a broken promise.
Do they come back? Even with the conventional treatments in a couple of years, the spurge will come back, or is that so? It's just a shorthand or shorter solution.
Yeah, because there's always that seed in the seed bank. Spurge creates a lot of seed, and it can be viable for 8 years, I think. And yeah, that's why we keep seeing it cycle back. And after we nuke it with herbicide, those herbicides are costly.
They are, yeah. Well, thank you, May. I really appreciate your time this morning, your answers to your questions and sharing your research, and really appreciate your time and thank you.
My pleasure.
So we'll move on to our second researcher of the day, and I'm just going to put my screen back up. That's Mr. Steve Sager, also with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Good morning, Steve. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Dan. Good morning, everybody.
So same question to you that I started off with May, just if we can give a brief description of a brief background on yourself and your education, and that would be great.
Yeah, I have a bachelor degree in agriculture, majoring in agronomy from the University of Manitoba. And I have 30 years of experience with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada as a soil resource specialist. I've been in Melville, Saskatchewan, Beausejour for about 15 years, and then the last 15 or 16 years or so at the research station at Morden.
So obviously you've been in the agriculture industry for a while, but what first kind of attracted you to the agriculture industry and specifically agricultural research?
Yeah, I grew up in a mixed family farm, grain and cattle, just west of Morden, and I always had an interest in agriculture and active in the farm, and then also growing up in Morden, I always was intrigued and fascinated with the type of research going on at the Morden Research Center. And when I went into agriculture at university, I was able to have a summer job at the Morden Research Station, and I gained a lot of valuable experience in research, setting up trials and applying treatments, collecting and recording data, and doing some of the analysis. So it was kind of a good building block to lead into my career as a soil resource specialist. Once I graduated from university, I was able to get a job with PFRA, and it was a good opportunity with working within a multidisciplinary team with engineers, soil specialists, economists, biologists, and it was kind of a similar concept or process as some of the work that we're doing within Living Labs, like looking at a whole picture and different solutions for on-farm or larger scale projects.
Thanks, Steve. So what is your, in your current capacity with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and the Living Lab Eastern project, what is your current role?
Yeah, as a project lead on, I have a couple major objectives or leading different types of projects. Water retention on the landscape is a major component of my work. Looking at the water retention with the benefit of nutrient and sediment reduction, as well as reducing peak flow. And then another component is vegetative filter strips at the edge of field to reduce sediment and nutrient losses within, the landscape. And then I also have other projects related to tile drainage, looking at the surface water, partitioning how much water under Manitoba conditions and different soil types, how much is coming through the tile versus the surface water, and then looking at the flow and the chemistry associated with that. And linked to the tile drainage, I'm also looking at different end of pipe treatments for the tile effluent under Manitoba conditions, looking at a saturated buffer, which is basically enhanced riparian area that the vegetation can utilize the excess moisture. So instead of the tile water entering the stream directly, some of that water gets utilized by actively growing plants. And then at the Morden Research Station, we also have a wood chip bioreactor that uses wood chips as a carbon source for bacteria to utilize the carbon and denitrify the nitrates that may exist in the tile water. And then another component is tile drainage recycling, where instead of the water entering the stream, that water gets recycled into a retention pond. So those are some of the kind of activities or components that I'm leading under Eastern Prairie Living Labs.
All right, thanks, Steve. In terms of we can get into some of the research that you're doing in the main drain watershed and with producers like Wayne Chubaty. Can you get into some of the work that you're doing currently in the watershed?
Yeah, I can. We have several projects and activities going on, and if I can share my screen here, Dan.
You bet. Stop mine.
So does the presentation come up here now, or?
Yeah, just click on this. Yeah, put it on slideshow view, and then you'll be good.
Does that show now, Dan?
Not yet, but it should pop up soon. Maybe try again.
Okay. Not sure why it's here. Let me just try this.
Yeah, we can do it last time. You want to just display settings there, you can switch it out. Yeah.
Is it up now, or?
Just the note side. So if you switch over to the, you go under display settings at the top.
The top.
Well, I see, we see right now, we see your presentation with notes.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have any notes, but is it large enough to see the pictures or?
Not really, no, if you could,
Here, let me just stop sharing and see if I can
Okay.
enter back into it.
okay.
How about that, Dan?
Nothing yet. We had this working before.
Yeah,
It's
not sure what I
technology.
did different.
We can see those pretty good, Steve, if you just want to work off. Yeah, we can see those pretty good. Just won't
Okay,
look at it.
sorry about that.
okay.
Yeah, so here's just Dorthea and Dan, you showed a picture of the watershed before. We have several projects going within, and this one shows the watershed, but also we have 15 or 16 in-stream monitoring sites that we're collecting flow and water chemistry data throughout the field season. So it gives us a good understanding or regarding some of the changes of flow and quality throughout the watershed. And as Dorthea mentioned earlier, the eastern third to half is sand and coarser texture soils, you know, a lot more hay and forage and cattle predominantly. And then the western 2/3 is goes down into the Red River clay, heavy clay soil. So you can see all those yellow labels are all in-stream monitoring sites that were in that we've been collecting the last year and plan to continue in this next upcoming year. So here's just a couple pictures looking at kind of comparing some of the typical sites upstream versus downstream with the size of the stream and the grasses and once you get further downstream, you can see it's quite channelized once you get into the heavy clay soils and larger drainage area. One thing to note I didn't say in the first slide is the outlet of the main drain exits just south of Dominion City, and there's a gauging station there that we also use. So like I said, we have 1 year of data and it was a dry year. We did get some stream or water quality data early in the year. I think it was early March. It was almost a month early, the snow melt, and it was very short. So, but we were able to get some data, and hopefully with the snowpack that we have this year, we'll have lots of flow in the upcoming spring. So I wasn't going to get too much into the data, but I was just going to discuss Wayne Chubaty's project, just give a bit more overview and build upon what he discussed, and then also some of the monitoring that we have planned. So here's a picture or diagram of the water retention pond that was a project that was constructed in 2020. And it's a fairly simple process with a low-level berm that cuts across an existing channel, and it with a culvert and a control structure, it allows for a backup and backflood of his existing pasture, and then also it backs up into an enhanced or existing dugout to increase the capacity for that the dugout for cattle watering. So here's just some couple pictures of flap gate, and then on the right hand side is the control structure to allow the flexibility to capture the water in the spring, and then as needed to lower the stop logs to release the water when allows. So for the monitoring, we're set up to monitor the water height within the drainage or the stored pond area. And we have monitoring upstream and downstream. One of the in-stream monitoring sites that was on the previous map is just downstream of this water control structure. Here's a close-up of the stop logs in the gate to back up water, and then it allows for pulling those stop logs if later in the spring to allow the water so that the pasture forages can grow. And the picture on the left is the dugout that when the water backs up fills the dugout. So yeah, so that's kind of just a quick summary of the Chubaty site. It allows us to monitor the flow and quality in and out of that retention pond. And then there's opportunity for new retention sites up or downstream of this site. And that'll provide the opportunity to monitor the impacts of multiple retention sites within the watershed, and especially along some of these stream networks. So it'll provide multiple benefits of that retention and nutrient retention and peak flow reductions. So I'm involved in this project, and Henry Wilson, especially on the water side, is one of the main lead researcher. He's out of the Brandon Research Center, and he runs all the water chemistry and analysis out of his lab there, and so we're working on that data now. And the in-stream monitoring, we also have Environment Canada involved as well on some of the monitoring and analysis side of that. So there's multiple groups involved in some of this data, and some of the in-stream monitoring really provides some opportunity to look at, how water quality and flow changes within the watershed, and then as we add BMPs, what their impacts are on upstream or on water quality and flow changes over time. So that kind of covers the main activities that I was working on with Chubaty's, Dan.
Perfect. We did get, do you have more slides to go through, Steve, or is that?
No, I think I was just gonna mainly discuss Wayne's project today. We do have a few other projects, but I was just gonna focus on Wayne's.
We did get one question here in the Q&A that I think is relevant to follow up on the slide you just shown, and it was a pretty direct question around how dry was it this last year? Did any water at all flow through the tile drainage projects that you have throughout the watershed districts?
Like some of the water retention, we did get some early flow early on in the year. with regards to tile drainage, we had very little flow out of our tile, just with 2020 being such a dry year, especially a wet or a dry fall. And then we all know how dry 2021 was. So we did get some early flow data in the spring of 2020, just because 2019 was one of the wettest fall on record. So we did get some early flow, but with the 2 years of drought, we all our sites across the 3 watersheds that I've been working on, the tile flow, we had, you know, there was just some early flow, but very low flow for tile.
Yeah, there's no doubt that I'm glad you were able to get to at least a little bit of some flow at different times, but there's no doubt it was a challenging year. I talked with May about this, as well as Wayne and Dorthea, about co-development and collaboration with producers and watershed districts. Can you get into a little bit of your experiences over the past 3 years when it comes to co-development and collaboration?
Yeah, like during the process, especially for the main drain, I was in early on some of the producer meetings that were held. I know one of the first meetings that was held at the main drain, there's like probably 30 or more farmers there and producers, and so it kind of gave a good start looking at what some of the issues and priorities and common concerns there were on the watershed or within the watershed, and from there we were able to identify several interested producers that were interested in working. And then as Wayne mentioned, and also May, then it really provided a good opportunity to meet individually with some of the farmers and looking at their land base or cropping systems, and then working on, you know, some of the issues or things that they would like to further work on, and then develop a project. So that's where several of our activities kind of how they evolved over time, and I think the process worked out very well, and kind of laying out on farm type research that you know, kind of fits or kind of addresses, you know, real life situations.
Perfect. So what's coming up for you in this next, the final year of Living Labs Eastern Prairies, and obviously, you know, continuing to monitor and measurements, anything else coming up for you in the upcoming field season?
Well, we're just busy getting all prepared for all our existing sites. So we're set up pretty well to collect data, soil or water and flow data, you know, right from snow melt on. So we'll continue that and monitor those projects throughout the year. And I really hope that we can continue with some of the field days and workshops, and, you know, kind of having in-person type of events. I think some of the fall field tours that we had last fall, Dan, you know, hopefully we can continue that type of work to kind of show some of the research that's going on, and hopefully, you know, continue that kind of concept with, or those kind of formats or events within each of the watersheds.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time, Steve, and sharing your research this morning, and sharing the work that you're doing and your background and knowledge of yourself. And so really appreciate your time this morning and answering all the questions.
Thank you.
So a common way to structure presentations is to always save your best for last. And that's exactly what we're going to do this time. We're actually going to get a look into something that you don't get to see very often in the last 2 years, and that's someone working at their actual workplace of of employment for the next presenter, Miss Melanie Dubois. That's in the lab. And thank you, Melanie, for joining us this morning. And I know you're live from your lab in Brandon, so nice to see you.
And nice to see you too, Dan. Thanks for buttering me up.
Yep.
Save the best for last. Very nice.
So Mel, like I said, you're live from your lab, which is great to see. And it's not something that I know it's been a struggle over the past few years with when in the research community, being able to get access to labs and to work with the samples and what you've collected over the past few years. Love to hear more about that. But to start, same thing I've asked of others is a little bit of background on yourself and your education would be great.
Yeah, so like May said, people in our field, we tend to have a combination of school learning and then hands-on learning. So I did a Bachelor of Science with actually mammalogy focus and forensics, which is not something you hear a lot for folks in agriculture. And then I did my master's in resource management from the U of M, which really has a focus on the practical aspects of resource management. So looking at modeling, economics, policy, all those kinds of things. And then I continued with keeping up in my field. So I'm a certified wildlife biologist, which I think I'm the only one currently working for Ag Canada. So yeah, makes me a little unusual.
Job security.
Yeah, hopefully.
Perfect. What attracted you? Obviously, you've got a long history as well as Steve and May in the agriculture industry. What attracted you first to the agriculture industry and more specifically to agricultural research?
Well, yeah, I kind of came at it from an odd angle. I was working for the Manitoba Museum as a technician while I was doing my schooling. And the mammalogist I was working for was working on ground squirrels and pocket gophers. And so I started working on that project, which of course took place on the farm. And I really, really enjoyed working with producers. And I was also very interested in those interactions between agriculture and the more natural parts of the system, right? Because it's so critical that you have, what we now call agro-ecosystem resiliency and ecological goods and services. Those terms weren't around, 30 years ago when I started working on it. We just sort of called it, the marginal lands. But yeah, I became really interested in how do wildlife and agriculture interact, and then how can they support each other? So I'm not from a farming background, although, my great-great-grandfather, I think, homesteaded in 1875 in the Interlake of all places, not down in the Red River. You'd think he would, because he had kind of his pick of spots. He was one of the surveyors, but still have cousins on the farm. But I came from the wildlife field, and I really enjoy that, because I think that that we really need that type of an approach in order to have the ecological goods and services that we need to support agriculture.
Perfect. So what is your current role with the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and you touched on this a little bit, but your role with the Living Labs Eastern Prairies project?
So I'm one of the co-leads with Henry Wilson, amply supported by John Fitzmaurice, and of course you, Dan. We're really a massive team for this to work. We've got so many researchers, and we couldn't do it really without the full team. So I'm a co-lead, but it just means I get tasked with a lot of the paperwork. I'm the lead of the biodiversity pillar on that. So, we work together. May is a really strong part of that team. And, fortunately, she already gave some good background on her stuff. What my team looks at is everything from pollinators and beneficial insects like ground beetles. We're looking at breeding birds. We're looking at invasive swine. We also do work on predators and trying to minimize some of the risks associated with predation on livestock. And we do a lot of vegetation surveys. So we're looking at land use and how that impacts wildlife and those supporting insects in the area. And we're also doing a couple of projects looking at riparian health and how those systems are working in the 4 watersheds. So we have a pretty extensive reach. We had 27 sites last year. So a lot of samples to be processed, that's for sure. And what we've tried to do is co-locate with other projects. So as May was talking about, for example, the vegetation, the revegetation for some of the projects, for example, that Steve has worked on, what we're trying to do is measure, okay, what are the biodiversity impacts of those projects? Because if May is lending her expertise and selecting those seed mixes to increase the biodiversity value of the site, you know, how does the biodiversity react? So for that, we're measuring all of those critters I talked about, pollinators, beneficial insects, birds, etc.
Perfect. And just a reminder for everybody, if you have questions for any of the researchers or myself or Wayne or Dorthea, please put them in the Q&A and box, and we will gladly answer them as they come up. So you touched on a little bit there, Mel, but do you want to dive into more about more of the details on the work that you're doing in Main Drain or the other watersheds throughout Living Lab Eastern Prairies? Share any information that you may have. Go for it.
Yeah, sure. Believe it or not, I am on a selfie stick. I have never used a selfie stick in my life. And I thought I'd be able to see me while I was talking, but all I see is you, Dan. So I don't know what you guys are seeing.
I see you.
Okay. Or would you be able to take, I can see my name and everything. Maybe if you, oh, see, there we go. Now I get to see. Okay. So yeah, when we were talking about this presentation, I mentioned to Dan, I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to take it from my lab because we're very controlled in how often we're allowed to come to the lab. Hopefully that will loosen up as our restrictions get less. But I'm here one day a week because, you know, other parts of the team, they've been furiously processing our samples. And I'm going to walk us over here. So what we do when we're in the field is we collect samples using these. This is a blue vein trap. And then we have cups. I didn't have my bigger cups, so this is what they look like. We fill these with propylene glycol, which is an inert, non-evaporating liquid, and a bit of Dawn dish detergent. So then we go back, we sieve them out, and we end up putting them in what looks like this. And this is actually from Wayne's property. This is from Chubaty. So we end up with a bag of insects floating in alcohol. And we have many, many bins. I think the last call is we have about 18 weeks left worth of washing and pinning. And we literally just wash them with Dawn dish detergent and we dry them with a hairdryer. It's highly technical stuff, right? But then what we end up doing is we pin the bees. So this is what they look like. And these are actually Wayne's bees right here. And what's kind of cool is that I did spot one just today right there. That's an osmia, which is a mason bee. I know for a fact we've only caught one of those previously out of about almost 30,000 bees that I've looked at. So sometimes what we get asked is, why do you spend so much time not just collecting the bees, but then also pinning and identifying the bees? Because it takes an extraordinary amount of time and labor and expertise to do that. For example, right now, I have some very special bees that were sent to an expert, Dr. Jason Gibbs. He's at the U of M, and it costs $4 a bee for him to look at my bees. Which when you have, 30,000 bees to look at, needless to say, he's not looking at all my bees. But the critical thing about understanding what's going on with your bees is because it tells you what's actually going on the land, right? Because we're doing all of these things in terms of looking at land use, right, and land cover. And we are putting in place certain beneficial management practices in an effort to improve the health and resiliency of our systems. And a lot of times we can say, okay, we think, you know, if you build it, they will come, right? If you put habitat in place, it will increase the biodiversity of, say, your beneficial insects. But you actually have to go out and measure those insects. And when you do that, what you have to do is come up with these types of collections. And as you're doing that, you're looking at all these different kinds of bees. Manitoba, when I first started working in this field, we said we had about 250 species of bee, but unfortunately we hadn't had a lot go on in Manitoba in terms of baseline inventory work and stuff like that. So we didn't have a good understanding. Now we figure we're at about 380 species. And it's not that we have added species, it's just we're getting better at identifying them. So as we identify them, for example, these bees here, they're from the violas in the upper oak. This particular bee here is called a macropus. It is a very special bee in that it lives only on the oils of a certain plant, which is known as yellow loosestrife. We never found the plant, but we found the bee. So then we know absolutely that that plant is out there, regardless of the fact that we didn't find it. So as I go through and I identify these bees, all these bees have different life histories and resource needs. So even if I can't completely inventory the resources are out there, I look at the bees and they're going to be sort of a backup to what we're seeing out there. So we have Patsy Michaels, she's a real key part of the team. She's been working on carabids, et cetera. And she's also a land use analyst. So she does a lot of our GIS work, which divides up the land into exactly what we're seeing there, right? You know, how much is in annual cropping, how much is in pastures, and then you break down those natural areas even more to tell us what's out there. Then I look at the bees and it's like, okay, it says that we have 30% in natural habitat, and it's broken down even further. Then as I take a look at the bees, it's like, look, we're missing entire groups of bees. So obviously something is going on out on the land that is not supporting those types of bees. So then, yeah, it all sort of acts as a way for us to understand the impacts of land use on what's going on our beneficial insects. And that becomes really important as, you know, in the areas that have insect-mediated pollinated crops and these like that, right? You need those insects to be there when you're trying to grow those crops. And we can go in and take a look and do these site samples. For example, we had 7 sites in Main Drain, and that will tell us more about what's going on in the whole area. So for this year, we're not going to go back and resample. We figured that we have enough, we've covered enough, and we're going to work our way through those samples. This year, we'll focus on looking actually at the vegetation. And again, we have the bees, we're working our way through, and so then they will back up what we're seeing in the vegetation. And because we have this GIS component, hopefully going forward, we won't have to do the boots on the ground sampling of the bees. We can apply the information just by looking at the land use and not have to back it up with the bees. So it's baseline work that all feeds into different aspects of the living labs. Am I rambling, Dan? I feel like I'm rambling. No, okay.
You're good. This kind of leads into what you were just talking about in terms of the indicators and everything that bees can tell you. This is a great question that was just put in the Q&A, and it does lead to, and I'd like to tackle it now because we do have the time. And Steve and May, feel free to jump in as well. But a question that's come on the panel, or to the panel of researchers, is which one of you can provide the most convincing argument that a given ecological indicator is superior to the others, i.e. plants, water, or insects, in terms of what is the better ecological indicator?
Well, from my perspective, you actually need them all. You know, because even when you're looking at the the biological aspects. So as I mentioned, bees, birds, et cetera, in order to really truly understand what's going, you have to look at the plants, you have to look at the water, and because each one of them holds different information, right?
Mhm.
And so you need those to work together, but I'll defer to May and Steve to see what they say as well.
Mayor Steve, if you're still around, we can come back to that as well.
Yeah,
Because
like
it
I
is a-
kind of agree. Oh, sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
go
I kind of
Steve.
agree with me or Melanie, just that all three are kind of important, and you know, healthy ecosystem with plants and insects are kind of the end goal. And you know, some of the water quality indicators are kind of, you know, kind of indicates, you know, what that leads to for health, or you know, what their impact might be on some of the biological aspects and plants and insects, and what the what a healthy habitat kind of the impact.
You himself.
I
May, you
agree
wanna-
with,
Yeah.
I agree with all of the above, like as indicators, certainly.
Yeah, because one of the things that sort of on the broader scale, Dan, you mentioned we have living labs all across Canada, right? So one of the things we're trying to do is come up with standard methodology approach to biodiversity measurements across the living labs. Because as the federal government, we're often asked, what impact is agriculture having on the ecosystem, right? And it's sometimes very challenging for us to answer that question. So we're trying to standardize what we're measuring across the living labs, but trying to pick indicator species is really challenging, because do you pick a specialist? I mean, I pointed out the macropis, which only eats one certain type of flower, or do you pick a generalist? You know, and those are really tough conversations, and what we've decided so far is, okay, we've got to measure a lot of different things. And we last year was incredibly challenging for the biodiversity team, because quite frankly, we bit off more than we could chew. We had a lot of sites, a lot of overtime had to go into it. And that was part of the pilot. And that's what we're trying to learn through Living Labs is what capacity do we have? What can we learn from the information that we get? What are some of the other ways we can get that information that is meaningful, right? Because it's fine for us to go out and collect all this, but it has to be able to be applied in the end to assist with beneficial management practices, assist with understanding what's going on in those watersheds, so that we can help producers, because that's what it's all about. One of the things I want to learn is, okay, how do we encourage more pollinators to ensure that we have the pollinators that we need to produce the crops that we need, right?
So is there anything else on the, in terms of the work that you're doing with it? You talked about monitoring, you're obviously doing you've obviously collected, now you're doing all of the identifications and analysis of that information. Is there other things going on in the districts, whether it comes to pollinators or biodiversity, that you're working on in the watersheds?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, some of what we're doing, I don't have a lot to report on the predation stuff, because that's going to be more of our focus this year. And again, that's that interaction between wildlife and agriculture, trying to reduce some of those losses for producers by understanding the predators and trying to leverage some of their characteristics to reduce the impacts they have on livestock. So that one will be a lot more of our focus this year. Yeah, riparian health. When I first started with PFRA, that was a big focus of my work. And, you know, it kind of went through highs and lows, right? Where the focus has shifted a little bit. I mean, right now, pollinators are kind of a big focus of what we do. Soil health is becoming more and more of a, you know, a focus for producers and for a lot of our agencies. But we still need to understand riparian health. So I'm actually revisiting work I did 10 years ago to try to come up with remote sensing solutions to doing riparian health assessments so that we can do it on a broader scale. So yeah, so that touches on some of the work I do both in main drain and then the other watersheds.
I know a couple of days ago, or a few days ago, we were talking, and you mentioned that a lot of your students and stuff are going through trail cam footage and the hours and hours of trail cam footage to identify predators and other things. You want to talk about that a little bit in terms of that work?
Sure. Yeah. One of the focus of the trail cams is actually looking for invasive swine. I'm not sure if people have been aware of what's going on with that. Invasive swine is a massive problem down in the States. A lot of the impacts are seen on pastures, outright destruction of pastures. It's a $1 billion issue down there. They also act as a reservoir for diseases that are quite easily transmitted to domestic pigs, because invasive swine really are the same species as the pigs that we enjoy for bacon, etc. So there's a real danger to the pork industry from invasive swine. They've done tons of work in Saskatchewan. So we're working with a researcher, Ryan Brook, who's based in Saskatchewan. He's a Manitoba boy. But yeah, so we've put up trail cams. Right now they're in Upper Oak and Swan Lake, because those are the areas that Ryan has data indicating that there's a high probability that we have pigs there. So we want to take a look and just add to the information that we have on the level of invasive swine that we have. So far, we haven't seen any, which is good, you know, that we haven't seen them. We've seen some other nifty critters, you know, fisher, martin, turkeys, coyotes, lots of deer, some really big bucks out there. I'm not telling you where we saw them, but yeah.
You just got Wayne to smile. That's good.
Yeah. Oh, maybe we'll put, well, we do want to put trail cams up in main drain, specifically for monitoring coyotes. Chances of you guys having wolves are pretty slim out there, but who knows, maybe we'll spot some, because we want to get an idea of what the behavior is out there, the coyotes, and what we can do to keep them from eating beef.
Kind of a lighthearted question that came in through the Q&A. Do invasive swine make good eating? And if so, what is the recommended cooking method?
Oh, yeah, they do. They are really tasty. Unfortunately, according to all the research, the worst possible thing you can do, though, is hunt them individually. They are like the perfect animal to reproduce very quickly. So they have groups, family groups called sounders. And if you hunt one or two of them, then it breaks up the sounder and it actually causes the females to go into heat. And then they just produce more babies. It's actually similar to coyotes. Coyotes have a very, like a similar reproductive response to persecution. And that once you start hunting them, then they tend to crank out the babies more. So I know Ryan and other researchers say, unfortunately, don't hunt them. Down in the States, they aerial gun them like with machine guns with infrared cameras at night, full on. We don't do that here, but they have pens and things like that, and net gun them and then humanely dispatch them with bullet to the head. That might be more information than some people want.
I do have a large number of follow-up questions that I will save for a conversation that we can have on the side for another time. But yeah, that's good. We talked about that. I talked about this with me and with all the presenters today. But in terms of co-development and collaboration with farmers, how have your experiences been over the past 3 years?
Well, you know, what was interesting is that we were doing a series of workshops right when COVID hit, We did get out to Main Drain. We got to North Shannon, we got to Upper Oak. We had 2 scheduled for Pembina Valley, literally the day they closed our office. And so it was fortunate that we got those ones done. Of course, I was part of all the consultation to get Living Labs started, but man, we have missed those workshops and those opportunities just to sit and chat, and chat at the farm gate, you know, and because that's really where a lot of that co-development goes. I think these Zoom sessions with one-on-one with producers has been great, because we get an opportunity to really hear about what's going on and just have a good conversation about the operation, what the needs are, what the information needs are, right? Because I mean, Steve, May, and I would come from PFRA, and really the research to me is only valuable if it actually makes a difference, if it's actual usable information that fills a need that producers have. So yeah, I found that that's the best part of Living Labs, is that constant interaction and feedback. Hasn't been as much as we would like, but hopefully this coming year we'll see more faces out there, and get more one-on-ones, and who knows, maybe even have field days where, you know, we get to hang out and look at stuff outside.
The site tours we had last September were a clear indication of how much people have missed that human interaction and the ability to get out. We were able to get outside and in smaller groups, and 20 to 30 people, and be outside and go tour a few sites like Wayne's and others around the province. And it really was really gave me for myself, who started the job with Living Lab Eastern Prairies in my home office and been there for most of it, right? And so the ability to get out there and then to talk to farmers and to have that interaction with media as well as researchers was fantastic. And the goal of this last year, absolutely a big goal, is going to be doing more of that and more talking about it, more human face-to-face conversations, hopefully.
Yeah.
I think you've touched on this a little bit, but anything new coming up for the last year of Living Labs for yourself, or just continue on? Obviously, you have lots of samples and lots of work in the lab to do, but anything new coming up or ongoing for yourself in the last year?
Well, the new stuff will be actually getting some predation work done. Hopefully, talking with producers, doing some of those risk assessments, and then putting some mitigation things in place. Will be good. Focus on riparian health assessments. Because last year we were just, full on pollinator sampling, which took a lot of time and a huge amount of effort. So this year, we'll be focused more on veg surveys and predators and that type of stuff. That's a little bit new, a little shift in focus.
So we've got about 10 minutes left. Time has flown by. It's been great. We appreciate it. Again, if anybody has any questions they want to throw in the Q&A, please feel free to do. What I wanted to do to close is just to touch on what's next. Obviously, this is the last year of the Living Labs Eastern Prairies project, this iteration coming up. The Living Lab initiative is being carried forward in the future through the Agricultural Climate Solutions Program with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Right now, provinces that don't currently have Living Lab initiatives are working through their application process and moving forward with starting Living Labs in other provinces like Saskatchewan and Alberta and BC and others. And provinces like Manitoba and Ontario and Quebec will be going through that process this year, starting in the spring, in terms of getting the next iteration of Living Labs Eastern Prairies, or whatever it may be called, going forward. So my main goal today was to be able to give people that, like I mentioned earlier, that understanding of what Living Labs is. So when they hear it in passing or through their watershed district in the coming year, that they're able to know what it is and to be able to contact their watershed district to get involved and to be part of that. And hopefully there's lots of hopeful things about the new HCS program in terms of dollars and funding and the ability to maybe be bigger and stronger and with a wider reach. So hopefully we'll see that. But MAW is committed to the Living Labs initiative and helping watershed districts with that funding, and have full intentions of hopefully being part of the next iteration of Living Labs. I want to give a huge thank you as we close out here. The last 2 weeks and doing the 4 workshops have been fantastic. I've really enjoyed all of the collaboration that has gone on. That's the whole point of one of the main things of Living Labs Eastern Prairies is that collaboration. And it's been fantastic over the past 2 weeks to see not only the producers, but today the researchers and the district staff and producers talk about regenerative agriculture practices, talk about cover cropping, talk about water retention and water quality, soil health, and other biodiversity stuff that we talked about today. I'll be happy to say for Steve and May and Melanie, your supervisor just emailed me and said you all passed your annual review today. It was through me, so that was good. So you're all passed. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Dorthea. You guys were all great. As I mentioned, we will have a follow-up email to all the attendees and that we will post the videos to our website and to our social media. We'll have presentations up on there as well. So stay tuned for the release of all the information for any of the workshops that you may have missed over the past 2 weeks. Please check them out. They were fantastic. And I'm not seeing any other questions in the Q&A. So at that point, I will say thank you and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for attending, and we will see you soon and talk to you soon. Thank you very much.